Welcome back to this edition of Insights. I'm joined by ACC Professor of Political Science, Tim Kuhnlein. And Tim, we were talking about what's going on domestically, but let's move now to more foreign affairs. And let's start off with North Korea.
Yeah, just some major developments this last week with the North Koreans firing more missiles. And, and with Rex Tillerson, our Secretary of State, being in Asia, making some really strong statements that we basically are not going to tolerate more of this aggression. And what this is indicating is that the prospects for escalating tensions in this region of the world are upon us. And so it puts the Middle East into a larger context. Of course, I think this is all riding on our ability to broker with China on a variety of issues. So it'll be interesting to see where this goes. But it's kind of scary to think. I mean, it brings back recollections of Iraq because we're hearing the accusations about nuclear capabilities, the ability to deliver, and the volumes being ratcheted up.
And talking about tension, let's move towards what's going on in the Middle East right now. We talk about, drone strikes and how they affect ISIS.
Right. ISIS is increasingly being contained, and we're going for some what seem to be maybe final punches, so to speak, but it really is a continuation in many respects of Obama policies playing out. Trump has indicated in this last week that he intends to use drone strikes anywhere necessary whereas Obama had a little bit more restraint on this because there are implications, of course, if we go after the leaders of these movements throughout the world. If drones become the way of warfare, we could very well be subject to this as well. But in any event, we're going to see an escalation of the targeted drone strikes.
And then let's move
with fewer restrictions.
Okay, so let's move now towards Europe, where Brexit, the vote happened almost a year ago, and now the date for when they're actually exiting the European Union has been established. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, that was a huge debate in London this past week. It was kind of fun to watch the Prime Minister's questioning this week. It was very animated. So we're looking at basically the beginning of a process at the end of this month, which coincides with the 60th anniversary of the European unification process, ironically, and the Treaty of Rome. But what's particularly interesting about this, I mean, that was to be expected. It was coming, but it's the counter reaction now that within the United Kingdom that's kind of interesting. The calls for Scottish separation are becoming very, very intense, and that was really what was most poignant in the British Parliament this last week.
And as this is seen with the increase in populism kind of around the world, do you think that's related in any way?
Well, the thing is, this populism around the world is so, in some respects, it's so, like populism in general, it's relative to historic period and context. And the populism that we're seeing right now is, particularly globally, is xenophobic and or ultra-nationalist, I should say, not anti, but ultra-nationalist. And while we speculated with the Brexit vote and then the Trump election that there was going to be a rise in more and more governments throughout the Western developed world going in this direction. The Netherlands just had elections this week, and this populist movement did not win. In fact, they were soundly defeated, and the centrists maintained a pretty tight grip on power in the Netherlands. And we'll see what happens in France. They've got elections coming up, and it's a similar scenario with Marie Le Pen, a descendant of the daughter of Jean-Marie Le Pen, a rabid xenophobic nationalist. So it remains to be seen. But all indications are that the world economy is rising. The stimulus efforts globally in the Western economy, and not just the Western economy, but across the board, responding to the 2008-9 financial crisis, are really playing themselves out right now. We're seeing the ripple effect of that. And this populist movement is kind of a delayed reaction to these, not only this, but longstanding concerns about where this global economy is really going and who's winning, who's losing. So the tensions are very real. That's really very evident. Societies are split almost evenly in many respects. but it's a phase, and to a certain extent we may need to slow down, but we're not going to stop the trajectory, that's for sure.
And so let's talk more about Europe, and
the trajectory of this globalization and the interdependency of international markets.
All right, and talking about what's going on in Europe and international markets, let's talk a little bit about NATO.
NATO, obviously the president has made some pretty strong comments in that regard, and with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel just being here, it was a very cold and almost uncomfortable encounter. She's holding her own, as are many of the more liberal tradition in the European context relative to this current administration. But of course, the president announced that he will be going to Brussels in May, at the end of May, to attend a NATO conference. And we've seen various indications, not only from Trump's own military leadership in the Defense Department and generals, basically trying to, as well as the Secretary of State Tillerson, trying to calm the European nerves about Trump's sort of radical suggestions. I suspect Trump I suspect he'll want to try to temper concerns as well. There's a lot of indication now that the European governments are really starting to essentially, I don't want to say abandon, it's too strong of a word, but shift away from a sense of comfort or dependency on the United States, and they're actually starting to look to Russia to formulate their own relations and forming agreements and contracts and things of that sort, treaties, because they're realizing that perhaps the United States won't be there for them. And they're making sure that they've covered the other base. There's a lot of evidence to show this. Whether this is going to hurt us in the long run, we'll see. Trump has some, I think, legitimate criticisms to expect that this part of the world should carry a little bit more weight for its own security. But at the same time, we don't want to lose them. And we don't want them to feel as if we're abandoning them. And I suspect that he'll want to try to temper this concern a little bit.
And so we talked about the budget in the last segment. Well, I want to talk about the budget as it reflects to foreign affairs and the State Department situation that's going on.
Yes, there's, I think, somewhere around a 30% cut of the State Department's budget. And they obviously aren't filling a lot of positions that normal administrations have. They've relieved a lot of people from the previous years, professional career diplomats and so forth. But what's interesting is that now we're getting people within the Trump administration actually saying to Trump, based on his budget blueprint, don't take that money away from the State Department. That is such a valuable investment, the soft foreign policy, as opposed to hard foreign policy directly related to military, that we need to be investing. It's cheaper to build schools and build relations in some of these places rather than neglecting and letting these societies struggle and deteriorate into conflict, then we have to send very expensive military presence. So it's kind of interesting to watch this dialogue going on directly within the administration. This isn't even between Congress. It's between the bureaucracy and the presidency, the president and the White House within the presidency itself.
Well, some fascinating stuff, Tim. Thank you for joining me this morning. And thank you for joining us. If you want to watch more Insights, you can catch us at the same time, same place next week.
Insights into Northeast Michigan is produced by WBKB News. If you have any comments, suggestions, or topics you would like to see on a future show, please email WBKB News. This has been a production of Thunder Bay Broadcasting Corporation. All rights reserved.